Hello again and welcome back to the latest episode of You Are My Boro with myself, Dom Shaw, Scott Wilson, both here from the Northern Echo, and we have plenty to get stuck in about because we had 2 or 3 weeks, Scott, of not battling through these videos, but battling to get half an hour out of it and battling to decide what we were going to have a chat about beforehand. Well, hellfire, we're not going to be short of stuff to shunter away about here for the next 25, 30, 35 minutes.
We're not, and we're gonna get properly stuck in to all things Boro in a second. But I don't think our loyal viewers and listeners would let me off if I didn't start this video by asking how the hell the Stag do went.
Well, you can probably hear from my voice already. If you're watching, you can probably see from my eyes, the darkness in my eyes, the vacancy between the ears.
It was Mallorca, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was MAGA. You know, Mallorca makes it maybe sound a little bit polite. But then there's a twist here, isn't there? There's a twist.
There is a bit of a twist, yeah.
Because this is very much You Are My Boro on tour. Where are you going on Friday?
Kind of Magaluf. To be fair, this is a little bit more in between Palmer and Magaluf, but there will definitely be a Magaluf element to the trip. Yeah. It's like tag team, isn't it?
Yeah. Someone told me before I went, actually, there was a Boro bar, but
you've got to. What happens in Magaluf stays in Magaluf. Yeah, fine. But you've got to let us know what you were dressed as in the airport.
I was dressed as Matt Clark going out. I'll try and find a picture. I'll hold it up. This isn't a great start for those who listen on the podcast platform.
It really isn't. For those of you that do listen on the podcast, there's a definite Matt Clark element to Dom Shaw's look.
Well, where can we see it? So this is the profile picture because Mark Drury, BBC Tees, friend of the vid and the pod, as I think the professionals say these sorts of things, once got me and Matt Clark together to get a picture pitch side after a game. Clark looked very bemused by it all. Can you see?
There we go.
So as you can see what's gone on there with the head swap, I think.
Yeah.
Well, that's the kit I had on to go out. Beautiful. To fly out on the first
Beautiful.
Day. I'm sure I've said on here before, I was once walking down Gisborough High Street where all the prior students were, and there's a couple of lads and someone shouted, "Hey, look, it's Matt Clark." Oh my God. Apologies to Matt Clark, by the way. Because
I was going to say, maybe now Matt Clark walks down the street and everyone says, "There's Dom Shaw from You Are My Boro."
Right,
come on.
That's the dream.
Let's talk Boro.
It isn't a Stag, so you won't be going out. You won't be going as anyone. I can't think of any Boro players, former Boro players, off the top of my head. We could maybe stick you.
Yeah, that's it. Anyone on the video? Yeah, who would be the lookalike? But no, it's not Stag territory. So no.
I was a mix on the second night. I was a mix of a chav and pitbull.
Oh, beautiful.
But the worst thing about that was there was people out dressed
like that.
Very.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh God. Anyway,
right.
What's been going on while I've been in there?
We're a week
on tomorrow. Yeah, we're a week on tomorrow for Michael Carrick's Boro exit. We're going to get into the candidates because Scott has written an exclusive story just before we started here on Tuesday morning. So we'll get into that. But first of all, how have you made how the last 6 days, 7 days has played out, Scott, since Carrick's exit?
Well, so, I've seen suggestions that it's kind of slow and spun out and everything. I think it was always going to be like this because we're in the close season, aren't we? There have been plenty of previous times where Boro have got rid of a boss, and it's almost been like there's a gun to the head because there's been a game in 3 days' time or 4 days' time, and the famous example of Warnock playing L because he couldn't get out the training ground because Wilder was coming in. That kind of scenario where Boro had to move really quickly because it was in the middle of a season. There was games, there was training sessions, all of that. Well, clearly that's not the case this time round, is it? So, there's been no massive imperative for Boro to get this done quickly. Although, where are we now? 10th of June. The players are due back in just over 3 weeks' time. So I think there's a desire for the new man to be in for at least 2 or 3 weeks, couple of weeks, get the feet under the table, get to know the lay of the land, get some recruitment meetings underway, all that kind of stuff. Then the players start feeding back for pre-season. So it's not a case of Boro, dragging their heels on this. I think it's just a case of, well, we've got the time, so we might as well use it. We might as well speak to probably more people than they would normally have done in this kind of scenario. And let's see where that takes us.
That's 100% the wise, sensible thing to do, isn't it? Unless you have got an exceptional candidate, and it's the only candidate in mind, the candidate that you want and you'd identified before Carrick had gone. And yet I think you've got to remind ourselves here that 2 or 3 weeks ago, it wasn't obvious that Carrick was going. So it wasn't a case of lining. So clearly they had options in mind.
Yeah, they'd started the process, but you're absolutely right. It wasn't a case that Steve Gibson had made his mind up the minute after the last game of the season that Michael Carrick was going. In fact, really anything but at that stage, the desire was to keep Carrick. Now, we know the review. We've kind of talked a bit about what that involved and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, that ends with Steve Gibson being persuaded that a change of head coach is the right way to go. So that's why we've ended up where we are now. But no, you're right. It's not a case that they'd been properly lining up Michael Carrick's successor for weeks and months. That definitely hadn't happened. And while some of the candidates that they have been looking at are candidates for other jobs, it's not like they're on the brink of taking those other jobs. And Boro had to move quickly because their preferred option, or one of their preferred options, was potentially going to be taken off the market before they have the chance to make their move and speak to them. That hasn't been the situation. So again, that's enabled them to take a little bit of time. And, it's not like we're talking weeks and months here. I mean, Sunderland famously last summer went 100 days without a head coach. And I think understandably by the end of that, there was getting towards a sense of panic from the fans about what on earth's going on here. Well, we're a week, you've got to keep it in context.
And the other thing is when we talk about the options, and we're going to talk about at length in a minute, your likes of Rob Edwards, Steve Cooper, Danny Rohl, and even one or two others who we were talking about at the back end of last week. Well, it would make sense to try to speak to them all, wouldn't it? It would make sense to sit down with them all. If those types of candidates are available, then you want to hear from them, don't you? You want to hear their pitch. You want to hear what they're offering, rather than just pin your hopes on one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting dynamic at Boro with all of these things is always that you've got a head of football in Kieran Scott. You've got a chief executive in Neil Bowser. You've got a wider recruitment team who, yes, are primarily involved in signing players, but you would imagine would also have some kind of input into, at the very least, the kind of analysis of the metrics of the various head coach options and what they do and how their teams play and all that kind of stuff. What would the fit be there? So you've got all of that going on. But then ultimately, the final call is Steve Gibson's. And in some ways, that's always the wild card option thing when it comes to Boro, that you can, it can feel like the club's moving in one direction. But if Steve Gibson decides he wants it to go in a different direction, he still has he's the one putting the money in. He has the final say. Now, that's not to say that his say is the absolute be all and end all, because I think if it was, Michael Carrick would still be the head coach. He's taken on board what people have been telling him in this review, and he's decided to do that. But ultimately, it was his call that Michael Carrick went, and whoever is appointed, it will be his call in the final say that they get offered the contract and they get that appointment. So, you've always got to be mindful of that, I think, with Boro, that there are processes that go on, but then, as the final say, it still really comes down to Steve Gibson saying yes or no at the end of the day.
And the manager market is similar to the player transfer market, isn't there? In that, how many players are Boro going to be linked with this summer who they have absolutely no interest in, they've never watched, not remotely on their radar? Well, the manager market's the same, because a club like Boro, a job like Boro becomes available, and suddenly their agent, their representative is only doing the job, getting the name out there, touting them, because then it becomes obvious to other clubs that they're available. And that was the case this week with the likes of Marty Cifuentes, for example, who was linked, but there's been no interest there. Stephen Gerrard, whose odds tumbled again, as is often the case. The odds are often an incorrect barometer, aren't they, when it comes to manager markets as well. But there was no interest in Steven Gerrard. Robbie Keane was ruled out last week.
Yeah.
Again, that's often normal in a manager market, isn't it? That you find out who isn't a candidate before you find out who is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, you make an interesting point there that this is a two-way thing. So Boro will have candidates that they will approach and want to speak to. But you will also have agents and candidates who approach Boro and look to put their names forward and all of that. Now, and that's where I think it becomes difficult sometimes, because you can have the club saying we've never really had any interest in this person, but you can have the agent saying, well, there was definitely talks. We definitely held discussions. Well, yeah, because you rang up and said, are you interested in X? And the club said, no, we're not. Well, from an agent's perspective, that's talks. That's so it becomes really murky. It's even murkier when players are involved, because, as we'll see as the summer progresses, often a club will have an A list, a B list, a C list of targets. If a player's on that C list, are they really a target? Well, maybe not this week, but maybe next week, if none of the A lists are available, yeah, they become a target. So it's always a bit of a movable feast. But I think on this, I think you're right. I think because they've had the time, Boro probably have cast their net wider and spoken to more different people and assessed more options than they probably would have done if this had been in the middle of the season and they'd had to move quickly.
So we're at Tuesday morning now, I think, although I don't really know what day it's been for the last 4 or 5 days. We're at Tuesday morning now. You broke the story this morning. Fill us in on where we're at now as we speak.
Well, so you did, as I say, you did a piece last night, didn't you? Basically saying that the Cifuentes and Gerrard talk wasn't really amounting to much. Well, as things stand on Tuesday morning, our understanding is that Boro are focusing now on the three main candidates that they feel are the top of their shortlist. And our understanding is very much that that's Rob Edwards, Steve Cooper and Danny Rohl. Now, does that mean that the appointment will definitely end up being one of those three? No, because they've still got to negotiate with them. They've still got to talk terms. None of that's happened yet. And as I keep coming back to, there's always the option that from absolutely nowhere, a phone call comes and an agent puts someone's name in that they've never really been considered. But the direction of travel at the moment is very, very much that Rob Edwards, Steve Cooper and Danny Rohl are the three. Now, Edwards and Cooper, you would imagine they will have spoke to reasonably extensively because they're out of contract. They're available tomorrow. They have been from the moment Michael Carrick left. In some ways, they're easy deals for Boro to do. Admittedly, you've still got to talk contracts, you've got to talk terms. Managers will want guarantees about recruitment, about who their backroom staff, all of that. We haven't got to that stage yet. So there's hurdles to be potentially overcome there. Rohl is the more complicated one because he is under contract at Sheffield Wednesday. Now, we all know that all hell's going on at Sheffield Wednesday. The players haven't been paid. There's a transfer embargo. The EFL have made charges because of non-payment of players. That's a football club that's got an awful lot going on at the minute. But Danny Rohl is still contracted to them. So if Boro want to offer him the job, then they will have to get permission from Sheffield Wednesday to formally speak to him. And there will be some degree of negotiation over compensation. Now, £5 million figures being bandied around. Would Boro have to pay that given all the financial problems that are going on there? We don't know. That would have to come out in the wash. But that's the more complicated one to do, I think. Edwards and Cooper, it feels like that if that's the direction Boro want to go in, they can probably wrap it up relatively quickly. And I think the suggestion at the moment is back end of this week, start of next week is where we're probably looking at in terms of a final decision and a likely appointment.
Let's focus on all three of them then. I'll say straight away, I think any of them would be really good appointments for a team wanting to get out of the Championship, and we can run through the reasons as to why. It's not difficult to see why they've been identified as candidates, as leading candidates for the job. Let's start with Edwards. The backlash is far too strong. But there seems to be concerns from some fans, given Luton's relegation last year, Luton's struggles last year.
Yeah.
And yet he did a remarkable job in getting them up. But then I think it's easy to forget they made a good fist, the best fist of any of the relegated clubs for the last 2 seasons of staying there. They were within 6 points of safety. I was looking this morning. They just ran out of steam a bit, really, at the back end of the season. I think they won one of the last 15 or something like that. He's worked with Kieran Scott before. He's interviewed for the job before, and by all accounts was hugely impressive. So he clearly is judged to perfectly fit the model and the direction in which Boro are heading.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a really, really sound appointment.
Yeah, I do. I think with both Edwards and Cooper, there is concerns at the way their last jobs ended. We'll get the Cooper obviously at Leicester. We'll get to that in a minute. Edwards at Luton. I understand that, and they're probably heightened with Rob Edwards because it was in the Championship. I do think that there's massively mitigating factors behind that. Now, what happened to Luton last season doesn't look good in the context of the other relegated clubs and the fact that they've bounced back. But the reality is, there is always the risk of a relegated club having to go through what Luton went through. We saw it with Sunderland, where things just unravel at such a speed and at such a kind of right through the club that it becomes really, really hard to reverse. Does that detract from what he did in the 2 seasons before? Well, maybe slightly, but I think only slightly. I mean, you've got to remember, 2 seasons ago, that promotion season with Luton, I mean, they were favourites to go down that season. They were one of the 3 teams being tipped to go down that season. And yet they were like a juggernaut in that league. They obviously finished 3rd. They won the playoffs, beating Sunderland and Coventry. And then, like you say, you know, everybody expected that they would be every bit as bad as Southampton were last season, if not worse in the Premier League. But actually, they were anything but. They had a really good fist at staying up. I think it was only in the last 3 weeks that the relegation was confirmed. They eventually finished 18th. And that was with by far and away the lowest budget in the league. And then obviously we know last season that things completely got away from them. And yes, Edwards was unable to turn that round. But I think that's a very different job to the one he'd be getting into at Boro. You know, I think he'd be coming into a team that, for all the failings under Michael Carrick, I think we would all agree that there's a core of a squad there that should be more than capable of competing at the top half of the Championship. I think his relationship with Kieran Scott would be important, because I think in January things started to go sour recruitment-wise. I think some of the tensions that we'd seen under Warnock and Wilder reappeared. Well, you'd like to think that their experiences of working together would mean that there'd be much greater harmony between Edwards, Kieran Scott and Chris Jones, head of recruitment at Boro. I think that's important, because I think it needs to be a good summer for Boro in the transfer market. If they are going to genuinely be promotion contenders next season, then I think they have to get things right in the market this summer. I think you're right. I think there is negativity is probably a bit harsh. I think it's lukewarm. I think that's fair in terms of what the Boro reaction would be to Edwards being appointed. So I think there need to be a little bit of work there from the club and from him if it was going to be him. But I think, you know, I think given everything that he did at Luton, and the fact that he got the Luton job because he had a really good coaching pedigree, he's got a background within the FA and the kind of England representative levels, as does Cooper, interestingly. You know, I think he ticks a lot of boxes, don't you?
Well, he won promotion with Forest Green as well, which got him the job at Watford. And probably the best thing that happened to him was getting sacked at Watford, because it then gave him the chance to go to Luton. But I remember when he was appointed at Watford, all the noises were that this is the appointment in which we are going to change our model. This is the appointment in which we're going to back Rob Edwards. This is a longer term project. Well, we all saw how it ended.
Yeah.
But he got the backing at Luton. And I think what he did so well at Luton, and we talked about this a lot with Michael Carrick last season, didn't we? Is he quickly identified how to get the best out of the squad he'd inherited and the players at his disposal, and he did that. And even in the Premier League, they didn't change for anyone, did they? I think quickly realised that if we're going to stand a chance, we have to be Luton Town, and we have to do it our way. And credit where credit's due. Yeah, last season was a right struggle, but you touched on it there. Maybe not so much in the last few seasons, but certainly before that. Sunderland, Stoke are another example, although they didn't go down. There are countless examples of clubs. Once they get in a spin, once that rot sets in, and once you get into the losing mentality, and it's not just the players, is it? You can only imagine the mood around a club when it's like that. It's so hard to stop that, isn't it? It's so hard. Just because you've been relegated to then flick a switch, right, it's all fine now, we're going to start winning again. It doesn't work like that.
And you can argue that they only really reverted to the position that they were in before he came, which you can make the argument that in terms of budget and size of club and size of ground and all that kind of stuff, it's probably where Luton should be, really. You know what I mean?
Bristol City have been...
that's an interesting dynamic in this.
As well,
Yeah, speaking to a few people down there, it sounds like Bristol City's recruitment process is basically following the same kind of track as Borough's in terms of them wanting to speak to quite a lot of people. The time frames sound like they're kind of the same. I'm led to believe that Rob Edwards is on the Bristol City shortlist. So that clearly is something that will be playing out if Boro decide that Edwards is the way that they want to go. I think the fact that he's not imminently, or it doesn't feel like he's imminently jumping for Bristol City, maybe suggests that the contact with Boro is interested in him and he'd rather go to Boro. That's just a bit of a leap here because Bristol City had started their process before Boro. I think if Bristol City were absolutely, desperate to pin him down, then maybe that would have made life more difficult for Boro. I don't know. It's hard to know, but I'm definitely led to believe that Bristol City are very interested in him as well.
If you're a manager, what I was going to say, if you're a manager, what's a more appealing job?
It feels like Boro have. I mean, Bristol City finished above Boro, didn't they? But Boro signed Tommy Conway from Bristol City last summer, and he was arguably Bristol City's best player. It feels like Boro will always have a better chance at the start of any given season than Bristol City of winning promotion, just because they generally spend more money. For all that they finish below them, it feels like they're probably starting with a stronger squad to start with. This is us speaking clearly with a Boro hat on and from a bit of a, we see Boro every week. I know bits about Bristol City. I don't know them intimately, but it feels like you'd choose Boro. And that's not just saying it because we're on this.
Boro are a bigger club.
Yeah. And that's basically where I was waffling around, but trying to get to, I guess.
They are, aren't they? Yeah, no from that.
Well, I don't know what they are now. I don't know what they are now, but I nearly dare bet you now that if you pull up the promotion odds for the championship before a ball's been kicked, Boro will be shorter odds to win promotion than Bristol City.
Steve Cooper then. So Steve Cooper, Nottingham Forest, then Leicester. Leicester was his last job early last season. Has been out of work since. The Leicester appointment, the fans were never overly pleased with that. I think not maybe because of the Nottingham Forest past, but sacking Steve Cooper certainly didn't work for Leicester, did it? Now, I'm not saying that they stayed up had they kept Cooper, but I don't think it's a leap to say that they'd have stood a better chance of staying up, that have finished the season with more points. But Cooper in general, again, plenty of pedigree. You can see why any championship club aiming to get out of the league would be interested in talking to Steve Cooper.
Well, I think, interestingly, there's quite a lot of parallels, I think, between Cooper and Edwards. Like I said, both have a background of working within the FA system and kind of England representative groups. Edwards obviously went into Luton when they looked like they were destined for a relegation battle, got them up against the odds. Cooper went into Forest when they were in a relegation battle, admittedly very early in the season, but they were bottom of the league when he went there. Turned it around superbly, very, very quickly, got Forest into the playoffs, won the playoffs, beaten Huddersfield in the final. Now, unlike Edwards, who was unable to keep Luton in the Premier League that first season, Cooper kept Forest in the league. They finished 17th. It was a battle all season, but they scrambled over the line. I guess you would say that they spent an awful lot more money than Luton did. It eventually obviously cost them a points penalty because they broke the PSR rules, didn't they? But I still think in this day and age, it's a big achievement keeping any team in the Premier League first time up, even if there was money thrown at it, even if even if they did just scramble over the line. I still think that's a really good achievement. Following year, obviously, I think it was about halfway through the season when he left, wasn't it? With Forest in trouble, and obviously they have kicked on since he left. But I still think his work in the Championship was superb because he turned that Forest team around. Admittedly, a team with some pretty good players in it, but really, really impressively, really quickly got them playing a really attractive, aggressive front foot style of football that I think Boro fans would love. The Leicester thing, I mean, I don't think anybody could have kept that Leicester team in the Premier League last season. That would be my view on it. I think you could have put whoever in charge and they wouldn't have kept that Leicester team up.
They started okay. They started okay, though.
Yeah, and then like you say, to be fair, they got even worse. They got worse after he left. You know, it looked so rudderless over Van Nistelrooy. So I've seen some Boro fans. Well, he's coming in off the back of just being sad. Yeah, but I don't think anyone would have done a job with that Leicester team. I just don't. So I would in absolutely no way hold that against Steve Cooper.
A strong background in player development as well because of his time at the FA. He clearly knows how to work with young players, how to nurture young players. Like, I know this is just one example, but Jed Spence, for example, at Nottingham Forest, the way he got a tune out of Spence, like nobody had at that point in his career. And I don't think anybody has since, really. I know he's been playing well.
Yeah.
He had a decent spell in the team at Spurs this season.
He was very highly regarded within that England setup as well, wasn't he, Cooper?
Yeah. And at Swansea, he did a good job at Swansea.
Yeah.
When he went in there.
Yeah, so there's definitely pedigree there, definitely.
And Danny Rohl.
Yeah, I mean he's the outlier of the two, if you like, really, isn't it? Because he's clearly much younger. Again, though, a background in kind of player development. He was involved in the coaching setup at Leipzig and Bayern Munich. He also had a stint with the German national team and the FA. So it's interesting that all three, to a degree, have that kind of background, which I think Boro will like because it's a background of developing young players, working with young players, kind of polishing rough diamonds, if you like, which is kind of where Boro's recruitment model is leaning towards, isn't it? So Rohl does have a background in that. What he doesn't have is a promotion in the Championship on his CV or a spell in the Premier League, but I still think those 2 seasons he's done with Sheffield Wednesday, I don't think many people could have done a better job with that, with everything that was going on at Sheffield Wednesday. I mean, they looked nailed on for relegation in that first season he was there. And they looked nailed on for most of his time there, but then he got them on this sensational run from kind of Easter onwards. And they scrambled over the line. I was at the game, actually, funnily enough, when they secured their survival by winning at Sunderland. And he was understandably proud of the job that he'd done there. Now, last season was even better, wasn't it? They weren't really in a relegation battle. Admittedly, they were never really in the promotion mix. But all of this is amid a backdrop of players not getting paid, financial uncertainty. What on earth is going on with Sheffield Wednesday? So I think you can make the argument that his achievements in those 2 seasons with Sheffield Wednesday is comparable to what Edwards did with Luton and Cooper did with Forest, even though they didn't end up in promotion, because Sheffield Wednesday have just been a basket case during his time there. I think what's interesting with Rohl is he's opinionated, isn't he? He's pretty blunt at various stages during this Sheffield Wednesday reign. He's basically said, "I'm about ready to walk." Now clearly a lot of that's been political to try and get on top of what's been going on in the background and all of this. But I think it feels like he's the one that might be a more challenging in terms of what he will demand from Steve Gibson, Kieran Scott, Neil Bowser, maybe. Certainly it feels like he would maybe want more of a handle on recruitment. But that dynamism, that kind of that being on the front foot at all times character might just be what Boro need, mightn't it? After he's very, very different to Michael Carrick, put it like that, isn't he? In terms of his demeanour, in terms of the way I'm sure he'd be with the press, you would imagine in terms of the way that he would be with the players. maybe that's what Boro need to jolt them out of this. You know, I think he would be, how do I put this? I don't want to say that Edwards and Cooper feel like the safer options because I think that's unfair. It feels like Rohl would be a bit more unpredictable, but sometimes that can be a good thing.
I think just clearly this is always just from the outside looking in, but you get the impression with him he knows what a club is about.
Yeah,
the community and the fans, and you get the impression he's really tapped into that at Sheffield Wednesday. And if you search Danny Rohl transfer frustrations, there will be an endless amount of stories about him saying, I need this, I need that. You always kind of get the feeling he's stayed at Sheffield Wednesday because he's known what the club could be.
Yeah.
But how long can that go on for? How long can you stay? And countless clubs have been interested in him. Southampton wanted him twice, didn't they? They certainly wanted him when they sacked.
Well, even just in the last 24 hours, Wolfsburg, by all accounts, want to speak to him. They're
did he all talk for Werder Bremen earlier this summer?
Yeah. So he's massively, massively in demand. And I think he's, you know, he again, I feel like he would tick an awful lot of boxes for Boro. I do think that, like you know, I think partly at Sheff Wed he's been coming out with his stuff because it's been so hard for him to get anywhere behind the scenes. You would imagine at Boro, you know, all right, they've got a recruitment model that they want to stick to, but it's still collegiate. The head coach still has a significant input in there. You know what I mean? But would Boro be worried that they're getting back to potentially a scenario where if the head coach doesn't get exactly what he wants, then that becomes an issue?
I think if that was the case, he wouldn't
have got this far down the line.
Yeah, because I think one of the keys now, and it should only help Boro moving forward, is whoever gets the job, everyone is going to be going into this with their eyes wide open. So I remember sitting with Kieran Scott at the end of like last season, was it, when so going into the most recent season, or it might be in the January, when he was talking about like the feel they have a true grasp now of exactly what Michael wants in a player, and everyone's on the same wavelength. Clearly, Carrick was always well aware of the model he was coming into. It was never a Warnock or a Wilder case. But I think with someone like certainly Rob Edwards and to an extent Steve Cooper, not as much as Edwards, just because Edwards and Kieran Scott have worked together in the past, right from the off, they'd be on the same page. They know what each other would want. And I think Rohl, clearly there's going to be a feeling out period because you've never worked with someone before. But I think to get to the point where you're offering someone the job, everyone's got to be comfortable with where it's working. If it is Rohl, you won't be shunning his handshake again, will you? In the press conference.
No, yeah, you better explain that one. Yeah,
at the Riverside.
I think it was at the river. It was at the Riverside. Yeah. I was just busy working.
And someone. So when Danny Rohl does at the end of every game or every press conference, when Rohl comes in, he goes round and shakes the hand of every journalist in the press room. And I'll let you take up the story here. So
I was sat with my back to the rest of the room, and I had my headphones in because it would be Carrick, wasn't it? Michael Carrick had already been in. So I had my headphones in, getting Michael Carrick's words off the tape, get a tap on my shoulder. I just thought it was one of the other journal lads. I was like, no, I'm busy. Another tap on the shoulder, turn around, it's Danny Rohl. Oh, hiya. Yeah. Pleased to meet you. Take the headphones off.
It'll be one of them where he comes in.
That was a good start.
He'd come into his unveiling press conference and think, where do I know it?
Yeah.
Oh dear. Right then, to wrap up, what time frame and stuff? What are we expecting? How do you expect the next week to play out?
I think we're looking back end of this week or start of next week. I mean, again, there is no gun to the head with Boro with this. There's no need to do it as a matter of urgency. But I think, it's we've had a week now. I think they will want to speak to, well, certainly their preferred candidate again. They might well want to speak to the two or three again. I think we're probably looking at back end of this week, start of next week. And then, like I said, that gives the new boss, the best 3 weeks really until the players are back, which you would think is more than enough time to get them up to speed with everything and feet under the desk and and start getting involved in meetings. No doubt there'll be a press conference and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would think that's probably about the time frame we're looking at.
Well, keep your eyes peeled on the Echo site. Obviously, we've got a new offer there running across the bottom of the screen: £4 for 4 months, or 40% off an annual subscription, which gets you all your manager news, all your transfer news, all behind scenes insight from MAGA trips from both of us last week and this week.
It does, by the way, as well. I'll just say it gets you a kind of ad light version of the website, but it also gets you an app, which is a page turner for the actual print newspaper. It's really good. I know I'm bound to say this, but it is really good. It's effectively the paper every day, if you want to have a look at it in that style.
And I got a couple of messages on socials last week when the manager stuff kind of started moving to say that the fans were subscribing. So we really appreciate the support there. We massively do. We'll put the link to sign up in the show notes, and we really appreciate your support on here as well. Do subscribe if you haven't already on the YouTube channel. If you're listening, on your podcast platforms, then rate and review there. Keep your eyes peeled on the site. We'll any breaking news, obviously, we'll break over the course of we'll follow over the course of the week. And let's see where we're at early next week. Let's see where Boro are at early next week in the manager front. Take care. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.